All right. Well, welcome. I am so excited you could be here. This is the session Accidental Friends, how a DBA and an SRE work together to optimize the system. So hopefully this is what you were planning to be here for today. Quick introduction. I am Kayla Boor. I am a site reliability engineer and I work at SoftPro in Raleigh, North Carolina. A little bit about site reliability if you're not sure what it is, because I do know I'm speaking to a mostly like data group today. Site reliability engineers help companies to develop service level agreements, so SLAs, SLOs, which are service level objectives, and then service level indicators, or SLIs, which help to back up the like agreements that we make. And so that's kind of what I do at SoftPro. At SoftPro, I help to develop monitoring strategies around our platforms, our systems, our products that we're using, and I help to create those metrics that go behind the service level agreements to show that we are truly, we're up and available how much of the time, like 99.95%, which are probably things you've seen, like, if you're in Azure or AWS, they have certain service level agreements that they've agreed to provide availability for, X% of the time. To be available. So that's what I do at SoftPro. And that means that there's a ton of collaboration between my personal team that I work on, as well as many other teams at SoftPro. But real quick, what helped me decide what to speak on today as part of it are some of the accidental friends. So why did we get here today? How did this happen? I'm highlighting two of my favorite collaborators. Joy Decker is one of our database administrators at SoftPro, and Anders Pedersen is the other DBA at SoftPro. And they're really how I feel like I learned the difference between just working with someone as a coworker and then working with someone and developing a true friendship out of it. So these are my accidental friends. And you can see Anders actually showed up at my house, that top picture where I'm holding my daughter. It was a Christmas a couple years ago. My whole family was here and he didn't have anything going on. I said, well, come join us. So he actually came and joined us on Christmas. And Joy, very similar thing. She has stayed at my house before when she's come to the Raleigh area in order to like stay for a concert one night. So we've used that. And so it's one of those things that's really fun when you move from just work proximity associates into being friends. And so that's kind of what my presentation is on today, is how that happened, but also the work that we've accomplished together as friends and as colleagues to bring our systems to a better state today. So real fast, here's our agenda for today. So what will we be going over in this session? What can you expect to get out of it? We'll do the goal of the session. We'll talk about why it's important to collaborate. We'll then go over the key concepts for collaboration that I feel like make really good, effective collaboration happen. I am going to then have an open floor discussion. So if there's ever something I'm talking about that piques your interest, you're like, hey, that really hits home, I want to talk about that, or I want to dig a little bit deeper, and maybe we don't go deeper in that, you can save it for that open floor discussion. I'd love to talk about it. And then we'll do a final wrap up and takeaways at the very end. All right, so diving in, the goal today, I kind of took this from a book that I read called Atomic Habits by James Clear. In the book, he talks about being 1% better today than we were yesterday. And so I talk in this presentation, I want to talk about the importance of improving systems and performance by making small changes every day to be a little bit better than we were before. And with consistency, what that really leads to, that it leads to really good things that you may not see in those small changes you're making daily, but you do see them have a large impact when you look back at the last, for me, it's been 7 years at SoftPro in my role, and looking back at where we were and then where we are today, 7 years later, is a very, very different place. So I want to talk about that actually. So my first week on the job, I had just joined our cloud services team. I had gone from a role, I've been at SoftPro, it'll be 11 years in August of this year. And I joined in the support role, just doing like a call center support on our product, on technical things. I did that for about a year and a half. I then moved into a role as a QA specialist, and that gave me kind of opened up the door to SQL Server. We design custom reports for our clients, and in that, it's stored procedures that are pulling data out of our system. And then it's crystal reports that then display that data for the client in ways. So I was QA, so I got to go do quality assurance. I'm checking to make sure that the report the client asked for is actually what they're getting, that the data coming back is good data. It's what the client's expecting. It's pulling from the right places. But it gave me time I got to sit down with developers. I got to look at T-SQL code that they're putting together. I got to help, facilitate conversations around what's pulling incorrectly and what's pulling correctly. So it gave me some exposure to that, which I had too in college, but really hadn't utilized until I was here in that role. And then I moved into this role about a year and a half later of being a production support analyst, which is morphed into a site reliability engineer now. And that role, I started on a Monday, and I remember sitting there, and it had been a while since I had been in that supporting role of like, okay, we've got these systems, we have all these things going on, we're monitoring things, we're looking at all these different things, we have tickets and escalations coming in. So I was like, I'm back in a role where that's what we do, but we do it internally for our own support team with our software that we're hosting. And it became something that there's another coworker who had started about a month and a half in the role before I did. And they were kind of new to it. They had come from support too, but they were working with a tool that our R&D team had created, which pulls a subset of data out of the database to make a small database for our R&D to look at. So if there's ever issues, they're able to actually take what the customer's experiencing and give it to our development teams to make improvements on. And so he's trying to run this tool and he goes, hey, I can't get this to work. It's just not working. What should I do? And I'm like, well, I've only been in this role a week and I haven't run that in, a couple years because I haven't been in a role that's needed to do that. So I said, if it were me, I'd probably go back and I'd collaborate with the developer who created this tool. Let's go back and talk to them, ask them what they would do, ask them to look at it with you. I know I've done that in the past in support. I had gone and asked developers, hey, will you sit with me for 10 minutes? Because this tool's not working the way it's supposed to. And he said, I think I'm going to try a few more things and see what happens. And I was like, okay, cool. I remember sitting at my desk, going through a couple other tickets, helping solve other issues, and started getting pings, started to hear my coworkers getting pinged, looking at things, and inadvertently, someone had removed some key software from a server, production server, which led to us rebuilding a SQL server, a production SQL server that day. And it's one of those things I'll never forget. We were all sitting in a room. Microsoft consultant is on the phone. They're like, hey, who here on the team knows the most about SQL Server that could help us get SQL back up and running? It turns out me, in my first week in the role, had the most experience with SQL Server at the time. And so the incident really led to this we found out, hey, we've got large gaps. There's knowledge gaps. There are things on the team that we just don't have. We have, some permission sprawl that, hey, we haven't really locked down least permission. We have alerting that should have been in place that really isn't working to our advantage. So it exposed a lot of areas that we could make big improvements. And so I remember sitting on a call with the Microsoft consultant for 2 days. Luckily, all the data was still on disk. So we were able to reattach databases, get things back online once SQL Server was back up and running. But it really exposed, hey, there's a lot that we could have done. There's a lot of things that we could do now to improve. So I want to talk about those things today and kind of dig into how did we get there? What does that look like? So obviously that situation, that failure that we had really showed the importance of collaboration. We really needed to collaborate better together. There are more things we could have done. We could have, taken some time, stepped back, taken a minute to really look at things, and it would have provided better clarity if we had collaborated together a little bit more. It would have, used resources more effectively. It also would have shown that hey, nobody's a one-man island out there. We're not doing it by ourselves. Even if you maybe don't have a team like I do at SoftPro that you're able to, pull on or collaborate with, there's always the community, which I love that aspect of this data community. There are people out there who are willing to listen and learn and talk to you and help provide insight if you don't have it. It also would have led to faster incident response. We would have been able to fix things and do things in a much better way and faster for the end user if we had collaborated together. So I think really it shows how important it is to collaborate, because systems are really complex and we don't know everything. So there's no way to know everything. So it's great when you can pull in someone else. Let's talk about that. So let's talk about, how do we collaborate? What does that look like? How can we do that? What steps or what things can we keep in mind to collaborate and make it more effective? So I'm going to break this down into 4 concepts that I feel like are make up for really good and effective collaboration that you can use on your team. So we'll jump in. That first concept is curiosity. I think curiosity is the key here. I went to a conference. It was a Women in Tech conference a few years ago, and the keynote speaker talked about staying curious, and that she came up with like a mission statement. She's like, if I had to come up with a mission statement for my life, I would use be kind, have courage, and stay curious. And she took some of that. If you're familiar with the live action Cinderella, it's really that have courage and be kind is kind of the theme of that movie, where they talk about having courage and being kind. But she's like, but the staying curious piece is what I feel like was missing for her life mantra. And I was like, man, I really feel that. I love the idea of staying curious, always asking more questions, trying to learn and explore, because I'm never going to know everything, but I do love trying to understand things a lot better. So keeping that curiosity mindset is one of the ways. And then this goes in even beyond. I think about after that event happened, I had been in my role a week, but it wasn't long after that we brought in our first database administrator, because that was one of those areas where we really learned, hey, we need this. It's a knowledge gap that we don't have. We need to bring in somebody really good. And that's when it was a few months later that Anders joined the team and came in as a database administrator. And so it was one of those times where I got to learn so much, because he's like, wait, you're the one who kind of knows, you helped rebuild the system. You can help me figure out where to go, what to do, where these live. I was like, absolutely. Like, we sat together for probably the first 2-3 weeks, just going over what systems we had at SoftPro, where to find those. But through that, I actually learned a lot more about Anders, because he took time to ask me questions about me. He was taking time to say, hey, like, outside of this, like, why do you have experience with SQL? It's not really part of your job. Or like, he asked questions about, like, what did I enjoy doing just day to day? And so we really got to develop a friendship through it, even though it was also about work and we're sitting there. But he took the time to make sure that he got to know me as a person and not just about the software. And through that, too, it kind of led me to realize how important that aspect of it is, that when you're working on a team, really knowing and understanding the other person and getting to know them personally really matters when you come to collaborate. It also showed me when Joy joined the team, it was something that I learned, like, too, it doesn't always look the same. I could get to know Anders really quickly, because he was, he's very open and speaks a lot and shares just a lot of details that you're like, I don't know how we went down this rabbit trail, and got to learning about, like, how you had originally gone to school to be a pilot and now you're a database administrator. But with Joy is a little bit different, but I learned to stay curious, ask questions, and 2, just to be open. I remember getting to know Joy once she joined the team. I invited them to come to my house for dinner. I said, hey, Joy, Anders, you're in town. You're doing like a DBA meeting where it's just the 2 of you kind of collaborating together. But since you're in town, I'd love to see you guys. Why don't you come to my house and have dinner with my family? And it's really the first time I feel like that Joy and I connected over, shared things personally of like, hey, you have kids and they're out of the house, totally different stage than I'm in. I'm in the throes with 3 small kids. But it was really fun to get to know her on a more personal level, because we stayed open and I had learned to be curious from Anders, not just about what the person can provide at work, but also about who they are as a person. And then I love, this is a James Clear quote from Atomic Habits. I'm going to use a couple of these today because I just really love this book. But your brain is like a muscle. So the more you train it, the stronger it becomes. So remember to keep asking those questions. Go beyond just what you're doing and ask why we're doing it this way. Ask, how have we done it in the past, or is that really how we should be doing it? So I really encourage the sharing too of knowledge. Once you have it, share it. Because when Anders joined, he had all the SQL knowledge. He came in with 20 plus years of experience in SQL Server that I couldn't match. But I had all the knowledge about SoftPro that I was able to give him and provide him details that now we're able to work together and really collaborate effectively to build a stronger system today. All right, so we're on to our second concept. This is our second concept for collaboration, for effective collaboration, and it is communication. All right, so real fast with communication, I usually think about talking. I think about talking a lot of like, hey, I need to communicate well. In order to do that, I need to make sure I'm talking through the points I'm making, or I'm helping provide details around things, which is wonderful. I think that's awesome. That is definitely part of communication. However, in the last few years, I have really tried to develop personally the act of active listening, to try to build that skill, to become more able to listen well, and to listen in order to understand. So I stole this is from Carnegie Mellon University, this little diagram here. And this is what they call the active listening life cycle. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to walk through that. So they say first thing is to recognize the unsaid. I think a lot of times when we go in to communicate, reading body language is huge, looking to see how are the expressions on people's faces when we're talking, or when we're talking about something, like, do they look really confused? It just doesn't make any sense. So it's looking for recognizing those unsaid things. And sometimes this even means the things that they're skirting around. Like maybe we're having a conversation, but we just keep kind of edging around this one topic. And it's like making sure to point out and to listen and to look for those things of what are we really missing in this conversation? Or are there key details that we're missing that it seems like we're just unwilling to talk about? 2, active listening seeks to understand. So it's listening in a way that we're not trying to respond to what's being said. And I think that's one of the things I hit the most often, where I'm listening to someone and I think of a response of, hey, I really want to say this when there's a pause in conversation. I really want to respond with this, instead of listening to truly understand what the person is telling me. And so a lot of times that to me is challenging. It's seeking to understand, staying curious about what they're saying, asking questions to go deeper into that is part of that understanding. But also I like to summarize. So sometimes I go back and I summarize, hey, this is what I heard you say. I just want to make sure that's truly what you were saying and what you meant, just to make sure that they know that they were heard and understood. The third one is decoding. So it's some of that. It's going into that, like, okay, I want to make sure I understood what you said. But also thinking about those actionable steps. Is there something we can do based on what you said? Is there anything that needs to be done? Maybe there's not. Maybe there's absolutely nothing that needs to be done. There's no actionable steps really from it. And that's okay. And that leads into the fourth one, where you can act on it. And really truly acting, if there are actionable steps you can take, maybe it's something as simple as changing up code, or maybe somebody's had a really bad day and it's like, hey, I can bring you a coffee, or I can do, some little gesture, just really shows that they are truly valued, and that they have significance. And then the fifth aspect of this is closing the loop. And so they talk about really it's expressing appreciation for someone's vulnerability and openness. So even if it's not something that you can actually do anything about, you can still say, hey, I really appreciate the feedback. Or I really appreciate, what you had to say in this conversation. Thanks for sharing those things. I think a lot of times when I go into meetings, I'm so ready to make sure I convey what I'm trying to get across, or I make sure that like the plan I have is in place and I want people to know that I think this is the way to go. To the point that like I have actually written a sticky note before I go into meetings. I'll stick it to my laptop if I'm going in, or I'll, like write it on the corner of my notebook and just say, do not speak. And it's just for me to look at and to remember that in those meetings, it's not necessarily my first agenda to answer or to respond, but that I truly want to listen and understand what's going on and make sure that I have a good understanding before I try to give a response or trying to help, provide maybe an action step. So that's where I think it's really important to active listen and talk, but also to believe the best in others' intentions. I included that because it's really true. I think sometimes we all have days where we're a little bit short or we didn't sleep enough. And so really believing that what somebody says, not to take it to heart, that, hey, I believe you have the best intentions in what you're saying, really leads to better and effective communication and collaboration. All right, this is our third point. So understanding. Understanding really goes into that. We've taken the time to be curious. So we've sat there, we've gone through, we've asked more questions, we've dug deeper, we've done our active listening where we're trying to really understand and we're not responding. We're just listening to understand what's happening. Now we go into how do we understand that? Understanding really leads to aligned goals. How do we align with one another? And I think the best example I have of this really is our database administrators. I remember having a conversation as we at SoftPro got more into how do we alert and monitor systems? How do we avoid situations? We, went overboard, right? We put monitors on everything. We're sending notifications everywhere. We're making sure that people know when something's going wrong so that way we can address it. As part of that, as an SRE at the time, I was going, hey, database administrators absolutely need to know when SQL Server VMs go down. They need to know when SQL Server on the machine, like if the service, were to go down and not be available. These are all things they should be alerted about. And it led to this really great conversation where we ended up sitting down and database administrators said, hey, we've done role-based access. We've done, least privilege, where a database administrator really can't do anything to a SQL virtual machine if the machine goes down. They don't have the same administrative rights as others on our team that are able to go if something happens and fix it or try to look into why that box isn't coming back online. They can kind of look, but there's nothing they can really do about it. And so it became this conversation around, should database administrators really be notified and called after hours if a SQL virtual machine goes down? And it became this thing of, well, maybe not. What I had thought I understood, I realized it was challenged in a way of they really didn't need to know that the virtual machine went down. They need to know once that virtual machine's back up, because they have all the rights in SQL Server to look at the database health, to check that databases are aligned, that they recovered correctly. We use availability groups at SoftPro. So it's one of those things, they want to make sure the availability groups are syncing, that they're healthy, that all those things look good. So we still have redundancy, which helps with our overall availability. And that conversation is really one of those that I just tone in and remember, because I'm like, man, that one was something I hadn't thought about, that I then gained understanding around because we took time to talk about it, to collaborate, to go beyond, to ask questions, and lead us to a better place. And I think too, a lot of times we talk about that people don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so too, with that, to understand a person, I think too, you have to go a little bit deeper into getting to know them. And we've kind of talked about how curiosity, when Anders joined the team, really showed me that it's really effective as you're building your team to be getting to know the person and not just the skill set. It's not just what they can add in their skill set, but it's what they add just as a human. And I love, there's a book that I started reading on my way to PAS Data Community Summit last year in November, and I have not finished it. It's really small, but I haven't finished it. And it's called The 6 Conversations by Heather Holleman. And I've also included, I have like a resource thing at the end where I've included this, but she has 100 questions at the end of the book, and they're all basic kind of beginner questions. She's a professor at a university, and it's one of the things she does to get her to know her students every semester is she asks a couple of these 100 questions that the whole class has to answer. And it's just a way to get to know them better. So these are really, really simple questions that you're not digging in. You're not getting like a super deep, into a super deep like conversation where you're like, oh, we might need therapy after this. But it does give you a really cool way to get to know someone. And a couple of the examples of questions are, have you ever tried to grow something? If so, what happened? And so that's something, it's not going to, it's not going to cause anyone to be like, hey, that's a really personal question. But it does get them to think, and you get to know a little about them. And then the other one, I actually used this at PASS. There was a networking event, and I had taken the book with me, and I was talking about it a bit because we were talking about like, how do you, how does small talk happen? How do you kind of, network together? And luckily, of course, at PASS, you kind of have a shared thing, right? Everybody has this shared knowledge and this shared kind of experience of like, we love data. Most of us are here because we work in data. Maybe we don't love it, but we work in it, and it's a shared connection. So we actually, I remember pulling out the book, and somebody pulled out a D20 and rolled it and said, okay, I got this number, asked that question. And the question was, what was your first song that you ever played over and over again? And that led to a really just interesting conversation where we got to know people better, because we had people from all different backgrounds, all different ages at the table. And so the first song that they ever played over and over again was really different based on who you were and based on, when you grew up and like what was popular then. But it was really fun because it gave you a little bit of insight into who that person is, what their background was like, and just what they enjoyed then. So it was a really cool way to get to understand and to know someone in a deeper way. All right, and this leads us in to our last key concept for collaboration. And it's action. It's taking those action steps to actually do something about what we've learned. So we've taken time, we've been curious, we've asked questions, we've gone into the, not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it, how we're doing it. Is it the best way to do it? Is there a better way to do it? We've asked those questions, gone deeper. We've spent time in active listening and communication, where we've sat there and we've gone, okay, I'm really understanding what the person's saying. I'm making sure that I have a clear grasp of it. And we've understood them, to now we're leading straight into, all right, what action can we take from this? Are there clear steps that we should be doing? And I think we definitely highlighted that at SoftPro. When we had our big event, it was one of those things of, hey, we have clear steps. We didn't have monitoring on systems that really should have been monitored. So like step one was getting those things monitored, right? Making sure those things are installed, making sure we're looking at those metrics, taking a deeper dive into things was a clear thing. We also knew we needed to do a lot more with permissioning and role-based access. And it's been really interesting and really cool to watch. We've gone from doing things manually, where at that time it was like, hey, we have to do this, we have to roll this out. There's a lot that needs to be done. We're going and installing monitors manually. We're doing this stuff, one by one individually. We're configuring thresholds individually. We're doing all these things that are really great, but it's all really manual in process. And I've watched over those 7 years, I've watched us go from doing things manually to starting to automate a lot of that. So at SoftPro, we do a lot with on-call and alerting, and we now use Terraform to monitor, to do a lot of that, to push out alerts, to push out alerting as code, but also to push out, on-call schedules. We have a system called OpsGenie, which will soon migrate to Jira service management, but it's one of those where it has in it, we've configured teams, on-call schedules, we've configured notification policies around when should we be notified for this, should it, we've put in rules around, should we only notify if it's been more than 15 minutes for something? Because a lot of times we have things that self-heal. We're an Azure stack here at SoftPro. And so it's one of those things of sometimes things are auto-healing, and we're able to just say, hey, let's just hold the alert and see if it's not back up in 15 minutes, because Azure generally will self-heal in like 15 minutes, then we want to be notified. If stuff's not self-healing, we want to know, we need to be alerted, we need to be aware of it. So it's led us to a really interesting place. I love it. We've gone from manual things to automated things. We now use Ansible too to roll out monitoring software. So as soon as servers are stood up, Ansible goes ahead and says, hey, you need this agent installed so you can monitor things. I'm going to install the agent for you and configure it. And then we've done rules and things in our monitoring system to set up and make sure that, hey, based on naming, we know exactly what that server does. We know exactly what it's supposed to do. We'll apply, thresholds and profiles to it. And those are all things that have become automated instead of manual. So we've taken time to really sit there and follow up on processes of like, hey, what we were doing was good. It was a good thing. But now there's a better way to do it, and we're able to do that now. I think about too, a lot of that is because we have buy-in. We have a lot of buy-in from our management teams and trust from management that we're able to do those things. But we also have really great team trust, I think, within our cloud services team, that we're able to collaborate together. And when something needs to be done, it gets done. It's one of those of, hey, we feel like, this is needed, or maybe there's a new alert needed, or we want to make sure that the database administrators, they put in a new job, or they're using SentryOne to monitor SQL, and there's new things that they need to make sure they're getting alerted for. We get to help collaborate with them to make sure that those things are going into code, that we're able to push it out, automatically, and that it's all being monitored. And now we have a single space that we're looking at instead of going and putting everything in by hand. So it's been really, really cool to watch those action steps take place and to really move us into a better spot. This is one more quote from James Clear here. It won't be my last one today, but the secret to getting results that last is to never stop making improvements. And I think this is a key part of action that we don't always think about. A lot of times we've put something in place and it's good and it's really good, but we don't always go and follow up and iterate on it. So a big piece of action is to remember to follow up and continue iterating, because we're never really done making improvements. Things are always changing. So remember to go back, even though you've done an action and maybe it's monitored now, or maybe it's working now, but let's make sure we put something on our calendar or whatever to remind us. Let's go back and see, is there anything we could do, or anything that could be done better to make it happen? Maybe it's something that there's not a capability right now, but eventually there is, or a year from now there's a capability that wasn't there before. I definitely see that, especially with Azure and our Azure stack. There's things that happen where it's like, hey, that was not a feature that was available to us then, but it is now. And so it's really cool to be able to go back and iterate on something and say, hey, we've been able to go back and fix that, or do it in a better way that we just didn't have available to us at the time. All right, so real fast, we're in that open floor discussion period. So I'd love, if you are in here, I'd love to hear from you. How could you use any of this to improve your interpersonal communication with your team? And then what is a conversation that you can think about maybe coming up next week, since today's a Friday, but coming up next week where you could lead with curiosity? So too, if you had any other questions, now is your time to ask. I'd love to jump into that. I also told Courtney that if no one speaks up, I'm going to roll a D100 and we're going to ask one of those questions from the book and see what the answers are.
How would you recommend people start the conversation with a new person? Because you said that Joy was a little harder to open up and whatnot. How would you help people be more comfortable with that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think a lot of it is remembering to kind of look for those signals. But I think with our team, something that we try to do is whenever we bring someone new onto the team, we schedule an hour call or an hour and a half call with a new person. And the real key of that call is not for them to get to know, part of it's getting to know what you do or what your experience is, but it's mainly to get to know them as a person. So we actually use that hour and a half call mainly to get to know them and to get to know about them, rather than to teach them about what we do or what our role is or what the systems are like at SoftPro. That's really dedicated time to get to know them as a person, especially after pandemic. It's one of those things where a lot of our team is remote. We're not all in the same location, so we're not getting together at the office and seeing each other and doing water cooler talk anymore. So that first call is really that initial kickoff of getting to know them as a person, not just as what they provide or what their role is.
Yeah, the point that you made around, I think, those kind of crisis situations that you jump into, that's kind of where you get to know people best, right? It's not as if people don't have the comfort of showing kind of a different face until they get into those situations where things are really going bad and you need to work together to get it done, obviously. But I've never thought about it from because I've read Atomic Habits as well, but I've never thought to blend that with stuff at work, because I've been in those situations with, when I first started out as a kind of engineer, working as more as like a support analyst for maintenance of servers, and now in my role, I'm kind of consulting and coming into organizations where I come up against people that are very defensive and closed off almost, especially the larger the organization. So my current engagement is with a large bank in the UK, and you often find that people are doing good work, but they don't communicate what they're doing, and they do it, wash their hands of it, and they're kind of like, look, I did this piece of work, so I'm safe. Like, I've shown my value, but there's no collaboration, there's no communication in terms of what people are actually working on. So I was curious if you had any experiences or kind of anecdotes to share around even just that. It's like everybody's working towards the same shared goal, but it can be quite hard to get everybody to understand that. I don't know if there's anything you could
Yeah,
relate to that.
I'm really curious, because I'm thinking about kind of when I started in the role, what that was like, because there really wasn't a lot of collaboration at the time. Does the situation you're in, do they have any kind of, like, I don't know if they use like any kind of scrum or anything, but do they have any rhythms where they are meeting and kind of discussing like what people are working on, or is it very much everyone's doing their own thing and siloed?
It's extremely siloed because it's across different functions. So you often find that, I think, the platform team is really up to speed on they do all their stuff in Jira, or like, I've seen people to the point where if you ping them on Teams, you would get no response, but if you raised a ticket with them, you'd get an answer from them, that sort of thing, like almost very, very closed off, and you've got to kind of almost track through the organizational charts to see who to speak to deal with a certain issue, that sort of stuff. So I think obviously the kind of Scrum thing there is good, but I think even like in terms of ideas people have or side projects that they're kind of working on that could have a massive impact on what you're working on, I think it was interesting to me. I was like, is there anything outside of like an open forum where we can get this all out? Because I see it with multiple people. We've came in as a consultancy. We're seeing a lot of people where, essentially like, because we never come in to replace people, right? We come into a system and we almost take the bulk of the dirty work off of them so that they can then go off and focus on what they actually want to be doing. So we're in a good place now, but when we first started, I found that around like just trying to win the trust of people. And often it was through those situations where you had an alert that you had to work through or something. I think it's about being quite upfront with the knowledge that you have as well. Like, I could have gone into situations being like, look, I'm the consultant here, so I've got the answer, sort of thing, rather than letting them take the reins and all that sort of stuff. It's really interesting. It's opened up a lot in my mind, the stuff that you've said around just approaching the situations and how to have the discussions and all that sort of stuff. It's something that I've never kind of really stopped to think about. So
absolutely, I love that. I think too, in those kind of crisis situations, there's a lot in like you said, in being humble about it, right? Because I think that's a big thing when people realize that you come in and you say like, hey, I don't know everything, but I am here. I know I've done that in situations of like, I may not have an answer for you right now, but I can tell you I am going to go back and I'm going to research until I figure it out. And then I'm going to come back with what the answer is and should be, and back it up with what it is, with like the data I found around it and how I came to this decision. And I think it really does take time, right? Because you are building trust, and from the get-go, nobody probably initially trusts someone from the get-go. So it's really just that staying humble and bringing in, and sometimes it's catalyzed, or it gets one key event happens and all of a sudden people start to open up. But I think too, some of it's leading by example, like you said, if you had to go in and you had to let somebody else take the reins, and that allowed them then to feel the ownership, that they were taking ownership of it, but then to share it of like, hey, we got to share back and forth the knowledge of this. So.
And more to the second point that you have on the screen there as well, it's kind of like, I've seen situations where we came in and we saw, like, for example, there was just a SQL server that they were working on, and someone had configured an alert where there was a ticket raised in their sort of ticketing system, like ServiceNow or whatever it was. Every single time there was a deadlock in the kind of management logs for SQL Server. And then it just becomes, so you've got like junior, but like support, like first line support analysts who are coming in and kind of being like, their workflow is find the alert, find the root cause, close it off sort of thing. But how are you meant to, what workflow can you set them off on when it's something that lasts for seconds at a time? And then you move on sort of thing. And so like, I mean, there's multiple issues there. There's whoever built the alert didn't build any aggregation. There's no roll up in terms of what's happening in a certain time window. But I remember asking somebody being like, why do we alert on this? The same sort of questions. It's like, to you and me, it makes sense.
Right.
Your immediate reaction was, like, why on earth would you do that sort of thing? But no one's asked them that question. They were like, that's just how it is. Like they don't have the curiosity to say that maybe an alert shouldn't be this.
Right.
And that comes into a lot, it's around, do they feel empowered enough to ask that? Do they have a culture where things like that can be questioned, which is often, I think, what I find I always enjoy more going into organizations is like, we can play bad cop for other teams or other organizations. We can point to something and say, why is that the case? But then work to fix it, sort of thing. So I think it's such an important thing to build in terms of a culture as well, with kind of lead with curiosity, is regardless of how much knowledge you have, there's absolutely no harm in asking why something is the way it is, because for all you know, it is that way because some person set it up that way 20 years ago and no one's thought to change it. So that's really good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I'll give us a few more minutes here if anybody else has anything.
Hi, Kayla. This is Sakshita. So one thing I've always wondered, like where, especially when you have a new team member join and let's say there's a big production issue, what is a good balance between like getting them onboarded, but like, still not losing the focus of the production issue? Because sometimes it's hard to give them that experience that helps them get the confidence that they can handle it on their own the next time. But at the same time, there is something that's like, pressurizing you to finish, get done with the production issue. So what in your experience helps strike that balance that they get to learn and as well as like, don't lose focus of the production issue?
I love that question. This is a really good one. We actually have a really good example of it. We just brought in an associate SRE at SoftPro to the team. And there's someone they've been on the team, so they're familiar, but they've been in a different role. So they've been doing like production support escalations. And so we just moved them up as an SRE. And it's something that I definitely weigh. And a lot of times it's based on, we haven't had a huge event quite yet. We have had something, but a lot of times it's one of those of, right now I'm jumping in because they've just started the role literally like 3 weeks ago. So they've just started in this particular role. So they've been added to, events or calls that maybe they didn't join before. And it's one of those things I always follow up. So I'm not at the point yet of saying like, I think this person could take the call or this person could become the face of the call and answer questions. But I like to go back once we've wrapped up or we've, fixed the thing and it's not a fire anymore, right? We've like put out the fire. I like to go back and ask like, is there anything about this you didn't understand? Is there anything about this you want to know more about? Are there any things that you felt like you couldn't have done yourself that you want to know about that I can help show you now? Because now we're not under pressure. We're not under that time crunch to fix this, to make it available again. So I try to do a lot of that of going back and asking. And we do at SoftPro, SREs help to do deployments a lot for other teams. So we actually coordinate with like 6 or 7 other teams at SoftPro for deployments. And those are a little bit more routine. they're a little bit, the things are more laid out, the processes are more established instead of a firefighting kind of situation where it's an escalation thing that's happening. And so I usually try to give them some leadership or some roles there to say, hey, why don't you take that on? And then I'll be there as support. So like, you're not alone. I'm not sending you to that deployment alone, but I'll be there as support, and I'll let you run that call. So like, you'll be the one who's, sitting there approving things, or if the developers come back and they want to look at something that got deployed and they need us to dig in on our side, I'm going to kind of let you run that, but I'm going to be here as backup so they know they're not alone. Because I think that's very intimidating coming in, especially if you're not as familiar with it, of like, I still have a lot of the tribal knowledge at SoftPro of like, I've been here, I've had experiences, I've seen a lot of things. So just slowly getting them in, getting their feet wet, so they learn the systems, they learn the underlying infrastructure and things of those systems, helps a lot, but not necessarily in a high pressure situation. So I hope that answered your question.
No, definitely it does. I mean, it's always because very recently I was in a similar experience, but not like a database production issue, but there was a production issue on a report which needed fixed. And even I didn't know what the solution was right away. I had to spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. But at the same time, I had somebody to onboard, and it was like, striking that balance that they know what was done so that they can take care of it next time. I think I like your approach of like, let's put the fire off first, and then let's sit and talk about it, walk through what was done, and then ask like, what part you did not understand or something you don't feel confident about. I definitely agree with that. Thank you, Kayla.
Yes, thank you for your question. I'll give us like 2 more minutes here if anybody has any more questions or thoughts or.
Maybe just one comment to the last one. I would also ask them what they would have done differently if they understand the process well enough to give input, because it's a good feedback for us to reflect on our own processes.
Oh, I love that.
Oh, yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, definitely. Because sometimes we think of only one way of doing it, but asking somebody's perspective is definitely a good one on that.
Especially if they're outsider or have done similar roles in another company, so that we can even improve on for us.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I love that. That's so important. All right, perfect. I'll give us 1 more minute if anybody has anything else, and then we'll move on to our wrap up. All right, awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for sharing. It's always really fun to hear what other people are experiencing too, because we're never alone, even in the collaboration part of that. All right, so real fast, what did we do today? We talked about the goal. We're trying to improve systems by making small changes that lead to big impact with consistency over time. We talked about why it's important to collaborate. Collaborating leads to shared ownership. It also leads to faster resolution for end users. And then we've hit those 4 concepts for effective collaboration: curiosity, communication, understanding, and action. So remembering to lead with curiosity, that we're trying to be, trying to learn as much as we can, keeping that mindset open to be willing to take feedback too. But then communication of active listening, making sure we're listening to understand and not just to respond, leads us right into that. We're understanding what's happening, and then we're taking action based on that we've communicated effectively, we've listened, we've asked questions, and now we're able to act on what we've understood. And with that, I want to leave you with one final takeaway here. This is also from James Clear's Atomic Habits. Small changes often appear to make no difference until you cross a critical threshold. The most powerful outcomes of any compounding process are delayed. So remember that even if you're making small changes and you're not seeing it, for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I think about it from the SoftPro perspective, looking back at the last 7 years, I see how those small changes truly made a huge impact now, even though they seem so small every day. And then I just want to leave this up for a few minutes. This is my LinkedIn that you can connect with me. I'd love to connect with you if we're not already connected. And the other one is for feedback. It's anonymous. It's like 5 questions. And I think too, Ben also put one in for evaluations, but I would love your feedback on today's presentation. If there's anything that we could do better or anything that could have been said better, I'd love the feedback because this is one of my first times ever presenting professionally. So I'm very excited to have been here and to do that today. And I'll leave this up for a couple minutes here just so you can get a screenshot of it, or you can, reach out to those. And then I just have a thank you slide with resources that I used during today's conversation. All right. And then the final thing is just to say thank you. Thank you for attending. These are some of the resources I use. So James Clear, Atomic Habits, Heather Holloman. You can also get her 100 questions if you want to get to know people better off her blog. So you could just Google the 6 Conversation 100 questions, and it's totally free. You don't have to buy the book. And then I didn't talk about it today, but I also have read Unapologetically Ambitious, which was a really good one if you're ever looking for mentors. She has a thing in there about asking how to, ask for a mentor without actually asking someone to be your mentor. So it was a really, really key takeaway that I took from that one. So, but that's all for my presentation. Thank you for being here.